With unmatched ferocity, Hitler's war machine has launched its blitzkrieg against Western Europe, pushing it to the brink. As we brace for our darkest hour, we must summon our strength to be the bulwark against oppression. The Nazi onslaught will be the greatest test we'll ever face. But with our allies, face it and defeat it we must.
This day we set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our civilization and to set free a suffering humanity. Our sons, pride of our nation, lead them straight and true. Their road will be long and hard. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. In this hour of great sacrifice, we shall prevail.
Korean War. Causes of your case study. The Korean War was the first major conflict following the end of World War II, and the first war of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. It was fought between North Koreans and the South Koreans throughout the early part of the 1950s. The main reason the United States got involved in Korea was the purpose of doing everything possible to keep communism from spreading around the world. The conflict in Korea had its beginnings in 1945, at the end of World War II, because Japan had occupied the Korean peninsula in the years before and during World War II. Both the Soviet Union and the United States worked to liberate the region from the Japanese. The Soviet Union invaded the northern half of Korea in August of 1945 and liberated it from Japanese control, with American forces liberating the southern half soon after. By 1948, Korea had been officially split into two halves with separate governments, along the 38th parallel. North Korea would be led during the war by Kim Il-sung, who ruled over the country as a dictator. South Korea would be led by President Syngman Rhee, an anti-communist statesman.
The main cause of the Korean War started after World War II, when an agreement was made between the Allied forces and the Soviet forces. The United Nations supported South Korea's government, and North Korea got assistance from both the Soviet Union and the Republic of China to build an assault against South Korea. Pre-war causes. Due to the recommendation of the United Nations, such as elections were selected, the North refused to participate. Korea is a small peninsula surrounded by China, Russia, and Japan. Because of this, Koreans have often had trouble keeping everyone away and have often fallen under the control of neighboring empires. They were controlled by China on and off for over 1,000 years.
The main cause for the Korean War started after World War II. An agreement was made between the Allied forces and the Soviet forces. The country was divided along the 38th parallel by American administrators. The northern part of the country was occupied by Soviet troops, and the southern part was occupied by troops from the United States. This caused much tension between the two countries, particularly the Cold War intensified, and alliances were drawn. During the late 1940s, Northern Korea established a communist government, and the 38th parallel became a political border between the two sides. North Korea, as a communist state, wanted to expand its borders, and many skirmishes and raids were carried out by both sides across the 38th parallel. The United Nations supported South Korea's government, and tensions continued to mount. North Korea sought assistance from both the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China to mount an assault against South Korea. China committed to support the leader of North Korea, and on June 25, 1950, North Korean troops advanced across the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. This event instigated what is now known as the Korean War.
Effects of the Korean War. There were several casualties on both sides, though the exact figure is unknown. The Korean War created more friction between the United States and the Soviet Union. War made the United States truly aware of the falling domino effect of communism. South Korea became an important U.S. military base with thousands of American troops stationed there. North Korea had carried out a controversial nuclear test and several ballistic missile tests, keeping South Korea, Japan, USA, Hawaii, and China in their missile range.
In the Korean War, there was included North Korea with the support of China and Soviet Union, and on the opposite side there was South Korea with the support of United Nations, principally from the USA. Back in those times, the North Korean leader was Kim Il-sung, and the leader of South Korea was Syngman Rhee. These are the significant figures.
The Soviet Union, for its part, denied Truman's accusation that it was directly responsible. The Soviets believed that the war was an internal matter that Koreans would among themselves. They argued that North Korea's leader, Kim Il-sung, hatched the invasion plan on his own, then pressed the Soviet Union for aid. The Soviet Union reluctantly agreed to help as Stalin became more and more worried about widening American control in Asia. Stalin therefore approved Kim Il-sung's plan for invasion, but only after being pressured by Chairman Mao Zedong, the leader of the new Communist People's Republic of China. Stalin had encouraged Mao Zedong to support North Korea's invasion plan, vaguely promising the Soviet air cover to protect North Korean troops. However, Stalin never believed that the United States and the UN would enter the war, and was reluctant to send the Soviet Air Force because he feared direct confrontation with the United States. The United States landed, and in Incheon, Mao organized that the United States and the UN could quickly overrun North Korea. At that point, he decided to support North Korea with or without Soviet aid, as he was determined to stop the Americans. Stalin eventually did send the Soviet Air Force, but only after pressure from Mao.
The North Koreans had their own view. They argued that the war began not with their invasion of the South, but with earlier border attacks by South Korean leader Syngman Rhee's forces, ordered by the United States. The DPRK maintains that the American government planned the war in order to shore up on the collapsing Rhee government, to help the American economy, and to spread its power throughout Asia and around the world.
October 1949, People's Republic of China established. Communists. The establishment of the Communist People's Republic of China is heartily welcomed by the North Koreans, as it provides a powerful ally, especially given Korean communists. role in fighting with the Chinese Communist Party in the Chinese Civil War back in 1945. Meanwhile, motivated to strengthen the USSR's ties with China's communist revolutionary Mao Zedong, and also to prevent the country from reconciling with capitalist America, Stalin is willing to consider Kim Il-sung's repeated request to invade South Korea to reunify the country. Now the West. The South Koreans resent their country being divided into two separate nations and harbor dreams of reunification. However, the US sees its temporary military presence south of the 38th parallel as a golden opportunity to practice its post-war foreign policy of containing the spread of communism around the world. This is especially important given the Soviet political structures being developed in North Korea.
From May to August 1948, both Koreas established separate governments. Communists established. The South Koreans resent their country being divided into two separate nations and harbor of reunification. However, the US sees its temporary military presence south of the 38th parallel as a golden opportunity to practice its post-war foreign policy of containing the spread of communism around the world. This is especially important given the Soviet political structures being developed in North Korea. The West established. In South Korea's first general elections, nationalists and staunch anti-communist Syngman Rhee is elected president of the officially declared First Republic of Korea. The newly established republic is soon forced to defend its citizens from unwelcome communist influence by southern rebels sympathetic to Kim Il-sung's North Korean regime. To protect the region's democratic nature and autonomy, Rhee has no choice but to order South Korean soldiers to suppress the treacherous communist rebels, which leads to the violent and fatal Jeju uprising.
1948-1949, Soviets and Americans withdraw military. Communists. Despite the DPRKCI rightful claim to be the authority of all of Korea, the Seoul regime under Syngman Rhee challenges this, needlessly aggravating relations between the two entities. After the Soviet troops withdraw, Kim Il-sung and DPRK leaders showed their determination for authority by creating a People's Army to unify the country by military means. Its manpower, the Soviet equipment significantly surpassed South Korea's armed forces, which proved an invasion will go well to kill tensions along the 38th parallel caused by the South.
The West. Kim Il-sung's self-appointed claims to rule over all of Korea are absurd. Unification will only be achieved by a military campaign northward under Syngman Rhee's leadership. Meanwhile, U.S. officials are reluctant to withdraw simultaneously, concerned that South Korea's army is not prepared to withstand a northern invasion and that nevertheless, Rhee may attack North Korea. Despite its Truman's Doctrine, which pledges U.S. support in helping any country under the threat of communism, the U.S. doesn't give Rhee's army any powerful weapons for fear he will use them against the Soviet-supported North, which will destabilize an already tense region.
Impact of the Korean War on the economy of the United States. The Korean War boosted GDP growth through government spending, which in turn constrained investment and consumption. While taxes were raised significantly to finance the war, the Federal Reserve followed an anti-inflationary policy. Land reform is one of the most important issues that characterizes the distinctive path of political economy. The Korean War reshaped capitalism and liberal democracy by recording both the domestic and international order around Korea. The domestic legacy of war is particularly effective in creating a strong state.
How did the United Nations influence the Korean War? Unlike some of the other cases, the UN actually have a pretty big influence on the Korean War. As you might know, in the Vietnam War, it was North Vietnam directly supported by USSR against South Vietnam directly, supported by USA. But in the Korean War, it was different. In the Korean War, it was North Korea directly supported by the USSR, but South Korea was supported by the UN instead of USA. But how can this come? To understand how this comes, we need to understand how the Security Council works in the UN. The Security Council was established after World War II and was the victors of World War II, which all the time was the UK, France, USA, USSR, and nationalist China. But after the Second War, there was a civil war ongoing in China, both before and after World War II. But after Japan's defeat in 1945, the communists in the Civil War was declared victor, and the USSR demanded Communist China to sit on the Security Council instead of the Republic of China. But USA and the other countries wanted to contain communism and would rather have the Republic of China in the Security Council. But the USSR was unsatisfied with the UN and therefore boycotted it. This means that they didn't use their veto power or voted for anything. So when the UN passed a vote for the UN should send reinforcements to South Korea in the form of soldiers and doctors. It was easy because USSR wasn't able to use their veto power. But even throughout, technically was the UN and not the USA. 85 to 90% of all of the soldiers were sent from USA, and of the 4 generals that were leading the UN soldiers, all of 4 of them were American. But in all, there was 21 different countries who supported South Korea, but all countries had their different reasons, and some countries might even have participated just to be more friendly to the USA and not even care about South Korea or world peace. Denmark was also one of the countries who sent help. Denmark didn't send anything or any soldiers, but they sent a hospital ship named Jutlandia. There is also a very famous song about this ship, and a lot of Danes are today very proud of it, helping even though it was just a fraction of how much the US had helped. This just shows that the UN actually had a pretty big influence on the Korean War, even though when we say UN, we mostly mean USA plus a few other countries.
Significance of case study in current times. Of all the case studies there is, the Korean War is the one case who have the biggest significance in our current times. Vietnam is still a communist country, but they have grown a lot economically as a country, and I would say they remind very little of the country they were back after 1975. Unlike Vietnam, Korea haven't developed since then. The economy of North Korea isn't really good, and because of their isolationist kind of system, they don't have a significant influence on the world economy today. Actually, they don't have a lot of significance in any other way than geopolitical and militaristic. For example, for just 2 years, there was the 2017-18 North Korea crisis in our times. That's why North Korea isn't that economically stable and good country right now.
2017 and 18 North Korea crisis was a period of heightened tension between North Korea and United States throughout 2017, which began when North Korea conducted a series of missile and nuclear tests that demonstrated the country's ability to launch ballistic missiles beyond its immediate region, and suggested that North Korea's nuclear weapons capability was developing at a faster rate and had been necessary by the U.S. intelligence community. Some experts have said that this crisis was the biggest militaristic and diplomatic crisis in 2017 and 2018. Why did China get involved? China's leader, Mao Zedong, was alarmed by the actions of the UN and the USA. China feared an American invasion. Mao did not want rollback to succeed. North Korea as a communist country provided a buffer zone for China. The Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance with the USSR meant that as their ally, China was under pressure from Stalin to help Korea.
Why did the USSR get involved? It was a part of Soviet ideology to spread communism, which is what Kim Il-sung was trying to do. Stalin wanted to see communism expand as long as he did not get involved in a hot war with the USSR. A successful takeover of South Korea would increase the USSR's influence in Asia, and the USSR was boycotting the UN and therefore could not use their boycott to prevent UN involvement in Korea, so they gave support to Sung. For the USA, the USA managed to prevent South Korea falling into communist hands, but the fear of the domino theory was to impact on US foreign policy decisions for the next 20 years. The war led to massive American rearmament. Their defense budget shot up to $48 billion in 1951 and $60 billion by 1952. The USA made a series of alliances, including one of the Philippines, and in 1951 they signed the UNSPUS Pact with Australia and New Zealand. The USA made the decision to help rebuild Japan, and a final peace treaty was signed with Japan in 1951, signaling the end of the US occupation. The USA refused to have any dealings with China, and the Korean War had a far-fetched legacy, as well as with 50,000 American soldiers killed. It was also the first war that the US entered that did not win outright.
For China and the USSR, the war increased tension between the USSR and China as they squabbled over who should pay the bill for it. The Chinese came to feel that the Soviet Union was both unreliable and demanding ally, and took greater steps to ensure independence from the USSR in the years following the war. In 1960, China broke from the Soviet Union in an event known as the Sino-Soviet split, creating tension amongst all communist powers.
The main events of the Korean War. June 1950. The North Korean People's Army advanced quickly and pushed the southern forces to a small area around Busan in South Korea. June 1950. Fearing a communist takeover, the USA sent troops to support South Korea. The USA appealed to the United Nations for help, and its Security Council agreed to send troops. This request was only granted because the Soviet Union was boycotting the Security Council.
September 1950. UN forces led by the American General Douglas MacArthur landed in Onchon and quickly pushed the North Koreans back over the 38th parallel. By October 1950, they had almost rolled back the communists to the Yalu River on the border with China. October 1950. Not wanting a US-backed state on its border, China invaded Korea and drove the UN forces back below the 38th parallel. General MacArthur called for the use of atomic weapons to defend Korea, but this was denied by President Truman, and MacArthur was sacked. June 1951. More UN troops were deployed to Korea, and the communists were eventually driven back to the 38th parallel. The war became a stalemate. The war then took to the skies, where American and Soviet pilots fought for the further 2 years. The Soviet pilots were dressed in Chinese uniforms, flying planes with Chinese markings. The aerial battles were kept secret from the US population in case they demanded all-out war with the USSR.
November 1952. Republican General Dwight D. Eisenhower won the US presidential election, promising he would go to Korea to see how the war would be ended. July 1953. An armistice, a formal agreement made by groups or countries at the war to stop fighting, was signed at Panmunjom on the 38th parallel, which left Korea divided as it had been in 1950 and still is today.
So as you can see on the picture, June 1950, the North Korean People's Army advanced quickly and pushed the southern forces to a small area around the Busan in South Korea. In July 1950, the USA sent troops to support South Korea. October 1950, UN forces almost rolled back to the communists to the Yalu River on the border with China. October 1950, China invaded Korea and drove UN forces below the 38th parallel. June 1951, the communists were driven back to the 38th parallel. July 1953, an armistice was signed at Panmunjom on the 38th parallel, which left Korea divided. And on those pictures, you can see everything very details and how everything happened.
It's your boy Lil Lucas. Yeah. Hey yo, grade 10, it's time. It's time, grade 10. Hey, grade 10 begin. Straight I gonna tell you about Korean War. This go drops deep as does my facts about Korean War. I never shoot, unlike the Koreans. In the war, 5 million people lives were defined. I think of war when I'm in Korea state of mind. Yeah. Now I'm going to tell you about something lit, and it's all about this Korean conflict. And it's pretty harsh, should try not to lose it, so now let me teach you how to do it. I know you already know the ABCs. Now I'm going to teach you about the Japanese. Before they surrendered in World War II, they controlled both Korea and China because they have a high IQ. At first they were divided by the 38th parallel, but everything didn't go that well. So North Korea, who was hated by the USA, they got really mad and wanted to slay. The war was started in 1950, and then everything got swiftly. North Korea conquered it all, but just until the UN troops they come. The war ended in 1953 by some men who had a lot of PhDs. It didn't end officially though, they only signed an armistice a long time ago. But in the end, no one won. So now this rap will soon be done. Our group really like to collaborate, and now we hope Dr. Shell will give us an 8.